What if the building you entered remembered you, even after you left? What if a hallway knew your footsteps and waited years just to echo them back with someone else walking beside you? Some stories are too disturbing to be true, but the places that hold them are still standing, and they never forget who came last. Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. From the silent wards of a forgotten sanatorium to a shopping mall swallowed by water and time, and a staircase that rises into a dark corner of nowhere. Every story here is a mystery that tightens one turn at a time. Which story creeped you out the most? Tell me in the comments, so I know what to explore next. Story 1. The Night Watch at Graybridge Sanatorium. I took the night watch at Graybridge for the same reason people climb fences around old graveyards. Curiosity feels heavier after dark, and sometimes you want to prove to yourself that fear is only a story your body tells. When the property manager offered me a 3-night contract to keep vandals out of a building scheduled for demolition, I said yes before I heard the name. Graybridge Sanatorium. The word hung in the air like dust you cannot quite inhale. He told me it had been empty for decades, that the town had learned to walk the long way around it. He told me not to worry. The power was cut. Nothing to flicker. Nothing to fail. I arrived just before midnight with a thermos of coffee and a flashlight the size of a baton. The building stood behind a line of dead lilac bushes, pale brick and long windows filmed with grime. The front steps were worn into shallow bowls. Someone had painted a red X on the plywood door to mark it for the wrecking crew. The padlock clacked against the chain when I tugged the handle. A raccoon fled the shadows and rattled a pile of old soda cans. The night smelled like wet paper. Inside, the lobby waited with a sort of patient cold. The floor tiles were white and green, cracked along the grout lines like ice over a pond. I could see my breath. My boots made the same sound on every step. Not like walking, more like tapping an empty jar. A plaque hung crooked over the front desk, and the letters that had once presented the hospital motto were now a scatter of missing teeth. The air was so still it made you careful with your lungs, as if breathing too hard would stir something that preferred a rest. I did the first walk of the perimeter with my flashlight tilted low. I am a believer in small lights finding true things. A moth lay dead on a windowsill, wings powdered into the dry suggestion of a shape. A set of patient chairs have been arranged in a circle, each seat facing the center. In the middle sat a dusty pitcher and a single paper cup. I aimed the beam into that circle and felt a strange hesitation, as if I were announcing myself to a room that had already counted who was present. I told myself that squatters sometimes create odd arrangements for comfort. I told myself not to assign meaning to chairs. My radio crackled. A cheap unit the manager had given me, probably older than I was. He said it could reach him from anywhere in the building, which was a joke since he slept across town. The static rose and fell in a long sigh, then settled. I keyed the talk button and said my name. A soft hiss answered, followed by a click that sounded like a tongue against the roof of a mouth. I laughed because laughing is a bridge you can walk over when there's nothing on the other side. The first sign that the building noticed me came in the east corridor. It was a simple thing. I passed a linen cart, and the wheels rolled half a turn all by themselves, the cart nudging forward as if it remembered how to move. I told myself the floor was uneven. I told myself my elbow had brushed the handle. 10 steps later, something thunked inside an empty patient room, a fast, dull sound like a book falling. I swung the beam in and saw only a metal bed frame and a radiator shaped like a sleeping animal. My pulse hammered hard enough to add a rhythm to my hearing. I had to speak out loud just to prove I could still form words. I said it was nothing. I said it was pipes cooling. The power was cut. There was nothing to cool. In the old dining hall, a fluorescent light hummed without light. It was a strained mosquito whine coming from a dead fixture. The bulbs were gone. The whine should have been impossible, yet there it was, a thin thread of noise pinned in place. The sound got louder when I stepped beneath it and quieter when I backed away. I stayed under it too long, foolishly curious, until I heard footsteps that were not mine pacing the hallway outside. They had a peculiar rhythm. They matched my stride a beat late, like an echo that had learned to anticipate. I edged to the doorway and peered into the hall. No one there. The footsteps stopped when I looked. They started again when I took my first step back into the corridor. I tried a trick. I lunged forward suddenly with a double step. The echo missed one beat, then doubled itself to catch up. I decided not to be funny anymore. There were hand-painted arrows on the walls from the old evacuation plan. They pointed toward a ward called East Recovery. Every arrow had a smear near the tip, as if a finger had dragged back through the paint. I followed them because your mind looks for signs that someone designed this path for you to walk it, and signs are both invitation and warning. East Recovery had double doors with narrow windows. The windows were smeared from the inside with something like Vaseline. When I pushed the doors, they resisted as if pressing into a dream. They opened on a long room with partitions instead of walls. Privacy screens leaned against beds. A forgotten wheelchair sat in a corner with a folded blanket across its seat. The blanket was dusty everywhere except one clean stripe, a perfect rectangle, as if something had rested there yesterday. I'm a rational person until I'm not. I flicked my light across that chair, and my mind supplied the weight of a body. It never gave me a face. That would have been kinder. A little bell lay on a bedside table, the kind a patient might ring. When my beam touched it, the bell quivered. I told myself it was my breath. I held my breath. The bell trembled again. I said hello because I am polite and because being impolite in a place like this feels like asking permission to be punished. The bell stopped moving. From somewhere near the ceiling, one ceiling tile up and two over, a whisper fell like dust. Not a voice, the suggestion of one, the sense of a mouth forming the shape of a word, the shape of my name. I retreated to the nurse station with my radio held against my shoulder like a relic. The counter had deep scratches where someone had dragged a heavy box across it in a hurry. The drawers were empty except for a single ring of keys with brittle tags. I turned the tags and tried to read the faded writing. One tag still had a name, Night Watch. The key for Night Watch was longer than the others and cold in a way that felt deliberate, as if it had been waiting in ice. I had a key to something I had not asked to open. The clock on the wall was stuck at 2:17. When I looked away and looked back, the second hand had moved a single tick forward. When I looked away again, I heard the faint scratch of it sliding backward to where it had started. It did not want to be seen moving. It would move when I did not look. I took out my phone and checked the time. 12:23. I held the screen up against the wall clock. The second hand twitched like a trapped insect. From that point on, the building treated me as if I had been issued to it. I decided to do the thing I had promised myself not to do. I would stay in one place with the lights out and listen. There were no working lights in the building, but I turned off my flashlight and sat on the floor with my back against the nurse station. Darkness in a place like Graybridge has its own texture. It is thick, yet full of tiny currents. My ears drank everything. Someone dragged a chain across tile somewhere on a lower level. A door closed carefully, the latch clicking with the patience of a long practiced motion. A gentle wet sound came from the sinks, as if water were being coaxed from pipes that had forgotten how to flow. That was when the radio spoke again. The voice sounded like my own when I was tired and trying to be brave for a stranger. It said my name. It said check in. I pressed the button and said I was in East Recovery near the nurse station. The voice on the radio repeated me with a tiny delay. I heard a soft mechanical cough through the speaker, like the reflex of an old speaker warming to its purpose. Then the voice said confirm. Not my word, a word the building wanted me to adopt. I said confirm. The radio clicked again with that same tongue on the roof of the mouth sound. I placed it face down on the floor and pressed my palm on the back until I could feel the plastic heat under my skin. It was warm, as if connected to something that still carried current. The Night Watch key wanted a lock. I knew this with the same unearned certainty that you sometimes know it is about to rain. I walked the staff corridor behind the nurse station and swept my light across each door until one of them showed a keyhole that matched the shape of the key. The placard beside the frame said observation. The paint around the letters had bubbled, and something like smoke stain curved up into a crescent. I put the key in. The lock turned with the sound of a cough that had learned to imitate laughter. The door opened on a narrow room with a wall of dirty glass. Behind the glass, down a short ramp, I could see a small theater with seats bolted to the floor. The room smelled like old wool and a hint of electricity. A projector stood at the back with a loop of film still threaded. I shined my light into the booth and saw a note taped to the machine. It was a rectangle of brown paper, corners curled. On it, in neat pencil script, someone had written, "Please make your nightly rounds quietly." There is no reason to write a note like that unless you expect someone to read it more than once. I did not touch the projector. I sat instead in the back row and stared at the glass. The theater reflected my face as a dull oval. When I blinked, the reflection blinked half a second later. I tested it by raising my right hand. My reflection raised its left with the same delay. I held my breath. The reflection smiled without showing teeth. I felt my scalp tighten as if my hair were learning a secret. Then my reflection raised its right hand, and touched the glass. That was not my motion. I stood up so fast that the seat squealed on its bolts. The sound went on longer than it should have, as if the seat were imitating being moved once more for the sake of practice. I stepped back in the corridor and closed the observation door. I twisted the key hard enough that my fingers ached. When I pulled the key free, the lights in the theater flickered in a burst, impossible because there was no power. The projector coughed up a single frame of film that slid down like a dead moth and landed on the floor. I left it there. I could feel the shape of it with my foot when I backed away, the brittle crunch of a memory you were not meant to carry. I started doing rounds like I imagined the real Night Watch once did. Not to keep people out. To let the building know I remembered to be where I was expected. The building is an old teacher. It approves of schedules. It approves of repetition. I walked the north wing and checked the doors. I walked the south wing and counted the steps. The radios in the patient rooms were long dead, if they were radios at all, yet more than once I heard a song that dated itself through a style of reverb that never met digital anything. The lyrics were fuzzy with distance. I recognized nothing. Maybe I recognized the feeling of waiting in a waiting room too long, the way music becomes a kind of room itself. At 2:17 by the wall clock, which is to say around 1:30 by my phone that was losing battery too fast, a series of small events began to attach themselves into a shape. First, the linen cart rolled 4 inches on a floor that sloped the other way, and a corner of sheet fell to brush the tile like a pale hand. Then a door down the hall began to swing open and closed on a slow hinge. The hinge squealed every third swing. The number rhythm got into my legs. 3 beats, squeal. 3 beats, squeal. I walked toward it, because you either walk toward the thing or you run, and I was not ready to run. The door opened to a room with 2 beds and a window that looked at the parking lot. I could see my car out there, a small rectangle under a maple tree. The driver's side door was ajar. I call myself names that I will not repeat here. I also call my radio. The voice that answered was mine and not mine. It said, "Confirm," and I said, "No, not this time." It sounded like static being taught to breathe. Then it said, "Then observe." It said it again. "Then observe. Then observe." I cannot tell if it was a command or a permission or a sentence about me as a person. I raised my light to the window and stared hard at the car, and the door swung shut of its own accord. I ran for the lobby. The plywood door was still chained. The padlock was still unexploded and heavy in my hands. Outside, the maple tree stirred in a wind I could not feel through the gaps in the sealed door. I thought for a long moment about leaving through a window. I thought about it the way you think about diving into cold water. It would be simple if you decided it was simple. The trouble was the sense that the building stood on the other side of every window, too. The glass felt like a suggestion of freedom rather than an exit. I told myself I would do one more round and then decide. The radio whispered my name in agreement. In the basement level, behind the laundry, a set of stairs led to a door with a globe of wire mesh around a single deadlight. The sign on the door said boiler. I could hear water moving beyond it, not in pipes, but like a shallow river. The handle turned without resistance. The door opened on a room full of dark water that had risen up to cover the ankles of the machines. The water was perfectly still. It reflected the doorway, and my flashlight beamed like a pane of smoked glass. I could see my reflection in the water, blurry and waiting at the edge. I stepped into that room with a cautious foot and watched the ripple widen. As my reflection broke, another shape resolved beside me in the water. A second person standing just outside the door on the opposite side. A person with my posture, holding their own light lower than mine. I aimed my beam at the doorway and saw no one. In the reflection, the other me tilted his head toward the far wall, where a series of numbers had been chalked above the waterline. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, written in a child neat hand, as if someone had been practicing counting. My reflection lifted a hand and pointed to the 7. I looked up, and the numbers were not there on the wall. They existed only in the water. I backed out of the room and closed the door. The wire mesh globe rattled against the dead light. The sound reminded me of ice sliding in a glass. Behind the door, the water began to move with a slow stir that developed into a pattern. Something like a footstep, something that learned to walk in inches. I went back upstairs and found the patient seating circle again. The pitcher and cup in the center had been rearranged. The cup sat upside down on top of the pitcher now, like a lid to keep something in. A damp ring marked the tile under it that had not been there before. I bent down to touch the ring, and my finger came up wet. The building had found a way to pass water between rooms that had no connection. I thought then about the numbers in the water reflection and about the way the echo footsteps had learned my stride. The building was trying to teach me a pattern. 7 what? 7 nights. 7 rounds. 7 steps. I remembered the note on the projector. Please make your nightly rounds quietly. A soft shuffling sound rose behind me. Not feet. Paper. A clipboard slid across the seat and came to rest against my boot. There was a form clipped to it. The edges were crisp, as if printed yesterday. The lines were for check-ins. Night watch, with columns for each hour. My name had already been written into the first column in a hand that mimicked my own, but tightened the letters. The next column had a blank line and a time. 2:17. I did not remember writing anything. I did not remember lending my hand. When the clock in the nurse station ticked forward in its cheating way and reached that stubborn 2:17 again, the radio spoke one more time. The voice was closer to mine now. It had borrowed the flaws in my throat. It said, "Last round." I found myself answering in a whisper. "Last round." The building sighed the way buildings do when they release settled air through the smallest cracks. The temperature dropped a degree that felt like it belonged to a cold memory. The east corridor flexed a tiny bit on its joints, not a movement you could see, a movement you could feel through your ankles. I walked. Each doorway watched me pass. Each window reflected my light back with a film of age. In one room, the bed held the dimple of a weight that faded only as I looked at it. In another, the curtain breathed as if a window had opened in a season where windows stay shut. I turned a corner, and there I was, down the next hallway, halfway to the fire door, holding a flashlight at the exact angle I held mine. The other me did not raise his head when I approached. He kept walking his slow 3-beat pace with a squeal every third step. When I reached the spot where I had seen him, the hall was empty. The fire door stood closed. My breath sounded like fabric moving against fabric. I looked back the way I had come and saw the flicker of a light turn the corner and vanish. I returned to the lobby with the sense that I had passed through a set of hands. The chain on the main door was still in place. The padlock hung as faithful as ever. The red X on the plywood had been traced over with a second X in darker paint that was still wet enough to shine. I put my fingers near it and felt no warmth. The wetness was the kind that never dries. I had enough of the game. I gathered my bag and my cold thermos and moved toward the side exit that opened onto the loading dock. The side exit was not chained. This small mercy felt dangerous. I pushed the bar and the door opened with the slow astonishment of a long sleeper waking to a different room. The air outside tasted like rust and leaves. I walked quickly to my car and held my breath when I saw the driver door. It was not ajar anymore. It was shut and locked. When I reached for the handle, my key was already in the lock. I did not remember taking it out. The keys felt colder than they should have. When I opened the door, my flashlight beam slid across the passenger seat and settled on something that should not have been there. A security badge lay where I would have set it if I were done for the night. It had my name, and beneath it, the title Night Watch. The photo on the card had been taken in the lobby of Graybridge, near the plaque with the missing motto letters. In the photo, I looked tired and a little proud. I had the faint beginning of a smile that rings like a tiny bell in my memory now. The badge had a second detail. The issue date. It was from 2 summers ago. I stood with the car door open and the dome light making a small yellow space in the dark, and I tried to breathe the way I had practiced ever since I took this kind of work. Slow by force. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The breath fogged in front of me and held the shape longer than it should. From the radio, clipped to my shoulder, my voice spoke again. It was closer now, then behind me, then from the trees, then from the building. It said my name like a parent, making sure you were awake before leaving the room. Then it said, confirm. This time I did not answer. I set the badge on the passenger seat and put the key in the ignition. The engine turned and caught. The radio hissed in an exhale that did not belong to any machine. It said, last round complete. It said, see you back inside. I drove anyway. The mirror showed the building receding into the kind of darkness that swallows silhouettes. In the mirror, I could see one square of the lobby window that I had not realized was clear. Behind that square, a figure stood with a flashlight held low, watching me leave. The figure lifted its free hand and made a small wave. I felt the twitch in my wrist, as if a string tied to me had been tugged. At home, the house looked exactly like the idea of safety I pay rent for. A porch light, a shoe by the door, coffee mugs still drying in the rack. I placed my bag on the kitchen chair and took out the radio to power it down. The switch slid with a little click. The speaker stayed silent. I sat on the counter and turned to hang my coat, and the radio clicked itself back on. The speaker made the sound of a small breath. It whispered my name. It said, confirm. I pulled the battery and set it in a drawer. I put the rest of the radio in a second drawer. I closed both drawers and leaned my forehead against the cool cabinet wood until the pulse in my temple slowed. I slept badly. Dreams are not useful. Everyone knows this. Still, I woke at 2:17 exactly with the certainty that someone had closed the door very gently in the next room. I lay on my side and listened for the rest of the motion that should have followed. None came. The lines of the room looked too straight in the dark, as if my house were a new paper placed over an old drawing that wanted to bleed through. When morning arrived without asking my permission, I made coffee that had the taste of old pennies and forgot to eat. The sunlight that came through the window made no real difference to anything that mattered. On the second night, I drove back to Graybridge because the contract said 3 nights, and because breaking a deal has always made me feel like I did not belong to myself. This time, the plywood door was already unchained. The padlock lay open on the step, heavy and patient as always. The building did not need to mimic light to show approval. It opened its mouth and let me step in. The lobby clock read 2:17 again, though my phone said 11:58. The circle of chairs in the dining hall had gained another seat. The clipboard at the nurse station had a new line with my name. The projector in observation had coughed up another frame and laid it across the first like a pair of crossed wings. In the boiler room, the water had risen by the height of the stair, and the numbers in the reflection had added an 8. I made my rounds. I confirmed. I observed. This is the truth I did not want to learn. Buildings like Graybridge do not keep their own time. They keep yours. They count your steps. They measure your breath. They practice your walk in the next hallway until it fits. They name the person who came last and the person who will come next with the same word and wait to see which one answers. On the morning after the third night, I returned my keys to the property manager. He seemed surprised to see me. He said the demolition crew had postponed by a week. He asked me how the nights had gone. I told him there had been no trouble. My voice sounded like a room learning to speak again after a long silence. He slid a new contract across the desk to cover the delay and said he would be grateful if I could watch just a few more nights. The papers rustled the way paper does when it has been waiting in a drawer for the right person to arrive. I told them I would think about it. When I got home, my phone counted my steps for the day without being told to. I do not use that feature. I never have. The number had already climbed higher than it should have. Every few seconds, I watched it jump by 7. Behind that, faint and steady, I could feel a second rhythm like a heartbeat that belonged to a room. At 2:17 in the afternoon, in a bright kitchen with a window that shows a maple tree that is not the one at Graybridge, I heard the tiniest click from my cupboard drawer. A radio that should not have been able to turn itself on did so with all the patience in the world. It whispered my name once. Then it said, "Last round." Then it asked a question it already knew the answer to. Confirm. If you're the sort of person who believes that places can learn you until they keep a version of you behind, let me leave you with this. On my 4th night, which I swore I would not work, and then found myself driving toward without making the decision, I parked under the maple tree and walked to the plywood door. The chain was gone. The red X had been repainted clean and sharp and new. I stepped through and felt the lobby breathe me in. From the far side of the glass, in the observation theater, a figure stood with a flashlight held low and its free hand lifted in a small greeting. I raised my hand back. I do not know if it was the first me or the next me waving. I only know this. The building smiled without showing teeth. Story 2. Echoes from the flooded mall. Story 2. If you are still with me, keep your ears sharp for the sound that knows your name. Because the thing that chased me through Graybridge has an older cousin. It lives where water does not belong, and it remembers the hours when people used to gather under a painted sky and pretend they were outside. This one begins with a dare I should have refused. It begins with a mall that drowned and did not stop breathing. I went in because my friend Marco said the place was good for photographs. He had a thing for broken reflections. The kind you find in food courts and perfume counters, glass still bright even when the world behind it has gone dim. He texted me 2 photos at sunset, an escalator reefed in algae, a carousel horse half submerged in the lower concourse, its painted eye looking through a rippled sheet of water. He typed, "Last chance before the city seals it, bring your best boots." I do not own best boots, only boots that have seen rain and a lie about waterproof. I brought those and a flashlight and the kind of confidence you put on when you do not want to disappoint a friend. By the time I parked on the outer ring road, the light had drained to a bruise. Wind pushed the cattails that had colonized the cracked asphalt. The mall sat with its mouth open. A loading bay door was rolled up halfway, high enough to duck under if you were willing to pretend you were not entering a place that had changed its mind about the surface. Inside, the smell hit first. Not rot. Not rot exactly. More like wet cardboard learning a song. Flooding closed the mall after a freak storm that stalled over the county and poured water until the drains coughed up their own history. The lower levels filled first. The upper ones followed, as if obeying a suggestion. The city kept promising to pump it out and never quite got around to it. The water found a comfort level and hovered there. Waist deep in some parts, chest deep in others. The stores were aquariums now, each one a blurry diorama of a life paused mid-sentence. Marco was late or had already gone ahead. Either way, his footsteps were not the ones I heard. Somewhere down the main corridor, water tapped with a measured patience. Drip, then a long pause, then 2 quick taps like a finger asking for attention. It echoed in a way that had a body to it. Echoes in that place did not feel like sound. They felt like something moving through you carefully, so you would not break before you learned. I called out his name. It slipped along the tile and came back with a little hiccup, my voice pinched thinner and wetter. The lights were long dead, so I used my flashlight and kept it angled down to avoid blinding myself on the ceiling mirrors. They were still there. They made the corridor look like a canal and also like a throat. I passed a store that had once sold shoes that squeaked on polished floors. A single display heel floated in the doorway, upright, spinning slowly the way a coin does when it loses its argument with gravity. I told myself not to imagine a foot inside it. I failed. The food court was a shallow bay. The neon signs were black ribs against the darkness. A bank of chairs had blown across the tile and clustered against a railing that looked over the lower atrium. The railing was slick and furred with algae. I leaned on it and aimed my light down. The atrium below had become a lake, a compass rose of water reflecting gown-draped columns and a paper mural sky. The carousel horse Marco had photographed stood near the center on a submerged platform, the painted saddle gleaming like a trick of light. When my beam touched its eye, a tiny circle of brightness held there, as if the eye had learned how to keep a light for itself. I listened. Something bumped a glass door, deliberate, twice, then a soft swish like a skirt moving through shallow water. I told myself a current had set some forgotten piece of display rolling. Then I noticed the water in the atrium was not moving at all except where that sound happened. There, concentric rings spread and faded and spread again with a pattern too regular for accident. The first door I entered had been a bookstore. The water line inside stopped just below the middle shelves, so the upper rows of paperbacks had survived while the lower ones drank. The swollen books lay in the water like sleeping fish. I reached for one that had not yet sunk, something about traveling to places that no longer exist. The cover slid under my fingers, and the book bobbed back up elsewhere, as if it wanted nothing to do with my hand. I watched it bump the leg of the table and rest there gently, spine up like a swimmer leaning against a pool edge. On the floor behind the register, a stack of gift cards had fused into a single warped brick. My light caught a splash of metal near the back door, and I picked up a set of ring keys that had rusted only on one side. On the key tag, printed in blue, a name. Marco. I told myself he had dropped them, which meant he was here. The part of me that still believed in coincidences agreed. The rest of me thought about the way the keys had rusted on one side, as if they had spent a long time lying against water that kept its shape like a hard thing. I stepped back into the corridor, and the sound of music rose under the water. It was faint, almost shy. Not a song I knew, piped instrumental, the kind you do not listen to until it stops. The notes had been slowed by the water to something lush and too close. I knelt because I wanted to prove to myself the source was not in my head. My hand hovered above the waterline. The skin on the back of my fingers prickled with cold that was different from air. I could feel the song there in the thin layer where air and water touch. The song felt like a mouth told to speak through a door. When the music faded, the dripping took its place again. Drip. 1, 2. Drip. 1, 2. The rhythm began to live in my knees. I stood up and kept moving because staying still in that mall felt like doing the wrong ritual in a room that copies you when you're careless. The escalators were frozen halfway, their steps slicked with moss. A fast food tray had wedged on one of the teeth and shivered there in any breeze that dared pass. I found Marco's first real sign on the second level. A tripod leaned against the railing near the entrance to an electronics store. One leg had a smear on it, a dark stain shaped like a thumb dragged down in a hurry. I wiped it with my sleeve. My sleeve came away damp with water that smelled like old coins. I shouted for him again, and the echo stacked a chorus behind me. The third repeat was not my voice. It pitched the last syllable up like a question. I froze and waited for it to try again. It did. The question mark grew bolder, as if I were being tested on my own name. I stepped into the electronics store with a tripod and keys clinking against my side. Glass cases had shattered and crunched under flooded weight, then dried to a slick mosaic. A laminated poster on the wall still showed a family smiling at a flat screen television of a size that dates itself. Their faces were clear except for the eyes, which had been washed pale by the rise and fall of water. The televisions on the shelves were mirrors now. My light made them into windows. In one of them, I saw the reflection of a man standing one aisle over, camera hanging from his neck, head turned just enough to show his profile. I pivoted and cast my beam that way, expecting Marco. The aisle was empty. In the reflection, the man took a step and lifted his camera and held it to his face. I walked toward him by walking toward the mirror. My own reflection moved, but it lagged, as if it preferred the pace of the water version of time. When I reached the end cap, The air felt colder by a degree delivered on purpose. On a scratch counter, propped in a little plastic frame, a shrinking pool of water cradled a photograph. My name was written on the back in Marco's neat block letters. I flipped it with my fingernail. The photograph showed the exact stretch of corridor outside the store where I stood, only the water level was higher by a foot, and something long and pale moved just under the surface like a ribbon being pulled along. At the far left of the frame, blurred by motion, my own hand reached in holding a flashlight. Something brushed my ankle. I did not kick. Kicking would mean panic, and panic would make sounds at water likes. I lowered the beam and saw a lace of old gift wrap ribbon spiraling near my boot. It had risen from the flooded level below, searching for the easiest curve back to the surface. It reached and reached. It touched my boot again and clung as if grateful to find an edge. I shook it free and it drifted toward the escalator, where it caught and shook on the teeth with a quiet, terrible patience that made my throat go dry. The carousel caught me on the return to the railing. I do not know why I looked at it again. Maybe because every corridor in that place led back to the same lake. The horse was pointed toward the upper concourse now. It had been angled slightly away before. It wore the water like a stolen coat. The eye seemed brighter, as if it had learned how to hold a second light. The platform around it bubbled once and fell still. A child's shoe floated past the horse's flank and came to a stop against the brass pole. It looked new in a way that lost things do. It faced the wrong way. I drew a slow breath and told myself to find stairs. Not escalators, stairs. There was a service stairwell behind the former cinema. The door stuck, then let go as if I had proved I would not damage it. The stairwell air tasted like the old popcorn breath of a room that once believed in weekends. My light found the painted numbers on each landing. Level 2, Level 1, ground. Below that, the steps disappeared into cold, flat black. Water had risen halfway up the last stringer and settled. In that flat black, I saw a shape moving in the same way I move when I'm trying to be quiet. I stepped back and the shape stepped forward. I raised my hand with the flashlight and the shape kept it down. It did not want to show me its face. Instead, it tilted its head toward the side door at the first landing where a faded sign read security. I do not take invitations from dark reflections, but I also do not ignore directions that feel like warnings disguised as help. I opened the security door and found a room with 2 monitors that had been new in another century. They were dead, yet I could smell warm dust and the particular mineral scent of electricity that wants to happen. On the desk was a logbook, the paper warped into waves. The last entry was dated the day the flood came. Water rising in anchor stores. Lower concourse closed at 2 p.m. Evacuation remains orderly. A small doodle beside the words showed 3 circles linked into a chain. Someone had drawn a wave washing over them. I paged back with careful fingers and found Marco's handwriting 3 days ago. He had signed in with a time and a nice line that made my stomach drop. Descending to lower concourse for carousel shots. If I am not back by midnight, call me and tell me to stop chasing the echo. He had drawn the same 3 circles on his page and colored the last one dark. I stood in that room and concentrated on the useful facts. Marco was here, or had been. He knew the echo would try to pull him down. He left his keys. He left me the kind of breadcrumb that dissolves when you touch it. I checked the time on my phone and could not trust it because the screen showed a tiny film of moisture under the glass, no matter how hard I wiped it on my sleeve. The music resumed somewhere beneath me, louder now, pushing through the stairwell like air from a mouth held against a crack. It sounded almost joyful, the way a mall sounded on a sale weekend when you could hear 100 footsteps and mistake them for music if you let yourself. I went down anyway. The lower concourse greeted me with a line that told the story of water better than words. A tide mark tattooed every column. The water itself had the stillness of a thinking thing. My light pressed a circle against it, and I watched silt dance slowly, then settle. From beneath the balcony, a whisper rose and broke into syllables you could mistake for language if you wanted to. It used the shape of my name and made it into a softer thing. The kind of name a mother gives a child who is asleep. I stayed well away from the edge. I told the water I could hear it just fine from here. It did not care about my terms. Every bench had been bolted to the tile. Every plastic fern had given up and hung its leaves like tired hands. The carousel was closer to the balcony now. I had not seen it move. The brass poles had grown a skin. The painted horse looked as if it had learned to swim while no one watched. On the far side, through a glass storefront that had cracked in a spider map, I saw a camera bag. It sat on a table like a hope that someone would return. The store had been a craft shop. Spools of ribbon and jars of glitter and the sad remains of paper flowers floated and rested in corners. I tested the door and found it locked. Then I noticed the lock had been turned from inside. Someone had done that with their last dry fingers and walked into the water anyway. The carousel creaked. I could feel the sound in my teeth. I need to tell you about the thing that looked like a hand. In the reflection, not in the water itself. It appeared when I leaned over the balcony rail to get a better angle on the camera bag. In the reflection, I saw a pale hand rise just beneath me, palm up, asking. I jerked back, and the reflection hand sank and slid a foot across the floor like a pale fish that did not know it had once been anything else. The urge to reach down was the strongest I have ever felt. I wanted to touch that hand and help it up and be a good person and be remembered for being a good person in a story told by water. I gripped the rail instead until my knuckles felt like teeth biting bone. Something in the building shifted its weight. A groan traveled the beams. Not a collapse. Not yet. Only the warning cough before one. Ripples ran from the carousel to the far wall and back. A sign thudded against a column like a flat fish losing an argument with air. The music cut out. The drip pattern changed. Drip, drip, drip. Faster now. The rhythm was stairs. I heard steps coming up through water. Slow, careful, clever. Whatever had learned to walk below wanted to try on the dry side. I moved. The stairwell door seemed farther than it had a minute ago. The air turned heavy with a wet cold that felt personal. The tripod clanged against the railing and made a small, bright noise that sounded like a bell in a place that did not know bells. The first wet footprint appeared on the tile, 3 yards from the balcony edge. I saw it arrive the way a flower prints itself when you press it in a book and wait. Water bled up from nothing and held the shape of toes. Another footprint joined it. Then a third. They were spaced like mine. I'm not proud of the sound I made. I do not think it mattered. The mall did not need pride. It needed a pair to walk the route it had drawn for me. I cut toward the cinema wing and found the service hall that ran behind stores. The hall dipped and rose like a slow-breathing thing. At each dip, water waited with a thin skin on top, a mirror I had to break with my boots. Each time I did, the sound whispered through the hall and sounded like a mouth remembering a word. The following noise kept good pace. It did not break the skin. It slid below it. That meant it was faster than me. It could make its own rules. I passed a door with glass porthole and saw my face in it, pale and stretched, and behind me, just for a second, the shape of a person at my shoulder. The porthole fogged and cleared like a breath pressed to glass. I felt the urge to look behind me. I did not. I have learned that there are moments where looking is the same as asking. I saved the asking for later when it might matter less. The hallway turned a corner and dead ended at a pair of glass doors warped by heat from a fire years ago. The frames had softened and hardened again with strange curves. On the other side, a small courtyard full of weeds and standing water led to an exterior exit that looked sensible and honest. Between me and that door, 3 inches of water and the memory of deeper water underneath. The glass door would not open all the way. It stuck with a stubborn metal hiss that made me think of teeth. I shoved with my shoulder and brought my whole weight to bear. It gave me 2 inches more, enough to slide through if I did not mind the cost of scrape. Behind me, the follow steps paused. I could feel the thought in the pause. Choose. It wanted to see if I would make it to the exit without the ritual it liked. I went low and pushed through. My jacket caught on the latch, and I had to leave a strip of fabric behind. It made a soft tearing sound that seemed too loud. The courtyard air felt enormous. Frogs sang from the far end and stopped all at once when I stepped into their circle. The exit door opened without protest. I was outside, I did not run to the car immediately. I stood under the open sky and watched the puddles around my feet. Water dripped from the cuffs of my jeans. It ran in a steady line from my elbow, which did not make any sense. I had not fallen in. I had not waded anywhere above the ankle. Still, the drip collected and fell with the slow certainty of roof leaks. The ground around my boots grew its own tide mark. I looked down at the fabric and saw the hem darken and rise as if it had dipped itself while I was not looking. On the mall's exterior glass, my reflection stared back with a fatigue I recognized. My light made a circle around my face and shoulders. The reflection did not show the tripod or the keys. It showed a camera hanging from my neck in a way that made my chest feel cold. Worse, the reflection waterline climbed to my ribs. My mouth opened under the reflected water and let out a stream of bubbles that wobbled up the inside of the glass and popped against nothing. I raised a hand, and in the reflection my hand lagged and then moved slowly, like someone learning to move underwater. I turned away, and the puddles followed with their listening quiet. I did not look back until I reached my car. When I did, the carousel was visible through a slit between two pillars. It had turned another quarter. The horse faced the courtyard. The eye kept the light I had given it. At home, I peeled off my jeans, and they made a sound like kelp separating from a rock. My floor held the shape of a puddle where I stood, and when I stepped away, the wet held for a breath longer than it should before admitting I had gone. I hung the clothes in the shower. Water dripped steady from the cuffs and the hem, and unervingly from the waistband, as if the water had found places to hold on that I did not know I was offering. The drip met the porcelain and sounded like the mall's first message to me. Drip, 1, 2. Drip, 1, 2. My phone buzzed while I stared at that rhythm. A message from an unknown number. A photograph of a carousel horse with its eye catching a circle of light. A caption below in Marco's style. I stopped chasing the echo. It knows the way better than I do. The message timestamp said 3 nights ago. The status below it said delivered now. I did not sleep. When the hour came that always comes, the one your body dreads, even if you pretend you do not believe in it, I heard water moving in the pipes. It was not the normal city water chuckle. It was the slow pull of a body sliding. I moved to the bathroom and turned on the light. My clothes hung in the shower. They no longer dripped. For a moment, I felt ordinary relief, and then I saw the wet mark on the tile. 7 drops in a curve like a smile. I keep Marco's keys on my desk now. The rust line has etched a faint shape onto the wood. It looks like a river turning toward a lake. Some nights the keys are dry, and some nights they leave a small ring, as if they have been set down on a counter after a brief swim. I do not visit that mall anymore. I can tell you I have found my limits. The truth is simpler. I can hear the music through my own window now on clear evenings. It is thin and far away, and kind in a way that feels like a trap. When the breeze pushes the curtains, I see a shimmer across the glass like the line where air learns to be water. If you ever find yourself in front of a drowned place and you feel the urge to look down into its face and see if it looks back, remember this. Water is an old mirror. It keeps the last thing it saw, and sometimes it offers that back to you with a sweetness that breaks your grip on the railing. If you see a hand rise, do not be the person who teaches it that hand will always come down and meet it. Leave something harmless on the edge instead. A ribbon, a key tag, a word written on a wet surface that it can smudge into what it prefers. As for Marco, people ask. There is no missing persons report, not that you would hear about. There is a photograph on my desk I do not remember taking, printed in the lab tint of an old drugstore printer. It shows a figure in the electronics store looking into a television that acts like a window. He is turned just enough to show his profile. If I tilt the photograph in a certain light, I can see the surface of the water in the reflection ripple in a pattern I know by heart. Drip, 1, 2. Drip, 1, 2. Some nights the pattern stops. Those are the nights I sleep. Story 3. The stairs that go nowhere. Story 3. Breathe in and count the steps with me. 1 for curiosity. 2 for the moment you start to wish you had stayed home. 3 for the realization that some places are arranged like a mouth. I heard about the staircase from a maintenance man who swore he would never fix a light in that building again. He said the stairs went up to a wall, and yet people came down from a floor that did not exist. He said the dust never settled there. He said if you went at night, you could hear someone counting in a whisper that did not match your own breath. Of course I laughed. Of course I went. The building itself sits at the end of a narrow road that used to feed a factory. The factory is gone, but the road still tries to finish its job. The windows are eyelids filmed in grime. The doors are pushed open in a way that makes you think of shoulders forcing a fit. Inside, the air tastes like old plaster and tin. There are offices with file cabinets welded shut by rust and break rooms with paper calendars that stopped on months where nothing important happened. It is an easy place to believe you are alone. It is also an easy place to realize you are wrong. The first time I saw the staircase, I did not recognize it as the one from the story. It looked ordinary in a way that tried too hard. Narrow, yes, but plenty of buildings have narrow stairs. What bothered me was the gleam. Every step was a little too clean. Dust lay thick on the railings, on the window sills, in the corners of the corridor, but the steps themselves had a polished skin like stone touched many times by hands that never left oil behind. Cobwebs floated from the ceiling and draped the banister in ribbons, yet the treads were bare. A small sign at the base read out of service, and someone had added a second sign by hand that said use other stairs. There were no other stairs. I put one foot on the first step and felt the kind of give you get from an old board that still knows how to carry weight. I tried the second and the third. The third step ticked like a clock. Not loud, just a wood sound with a secret inside it. I froze and listened. The building's quiet settled around me, full of pipes with nothing to do. Far down the hall, a sheet of plastic lifted itself and sighed back down. Somewhere above, a shoe scuffed and then carefully did not scuff again. I could have turned back. I could have told myself the floor was unsafe and the story was a story. If you have listened this far, you know I kept going. The ascent started the way all stairs start, with the simple honesty of up. The angle was tight, a shoulder's width from wall to drop. The rail felt warm in a way that old metal does when it is held onto the sun all day. I set a steady rhythm to keep my nerves quiet. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. At the sixth step, there was another tick, different from the third. More like a breath taken through a wooden mouth. At the ninth, nothing. At the 12th, the faintest little click, like a key turned somewhere else. By the 20th step, my legs knew I had been climbing longer than the space should contain. The ceiling above the first flight should have met me already. The shadow where the next floor would begin did not appear. The walls had joined me in pretending that normal rules still applied. They kept their pale green paint and their hairline cracks and the penciled names of people who had once worked here. El Weaver, 1998. Someone had drawn a tiny set of stairs beside the name, each step numbered as 7, then started again at 1, 7, 1, 7, all the way along the skirting board until the pencil wore down. The echo of my footsteps developed a strange lag. It was not the usual bounce you get in stairwells. It felt like my steps were being written down by someone following at a polite distance. When I stopped, the echo finished without me. When I started again, it waited half a heartbeat before adopting my pace. I turned my head and let my breath through my nose in a slow stream. The air behind me cooled by a degree that had nothing to do with drafts. That is when I realized I was listening for breathing that was not mine. There it was, soft, conserved, a student of my lungs. Windows began to appear along the wall. There were thin rectangles high up where light should shiver in, but these did not look onto outside. The first window showed a room of blue lockers, the kind kids used in schools that smelled like chalk. A striped scarf hung from one door and stirred as if someone had just walked by. The second window showed a field at dusk with a single swing moving back and forth even though the grass lay flat. The third showed a diner counter with 2 cups of coffee cooling while the wall clock stuck between numbers. The steam rose in little loops and refused to vanish. I told myself these were glass panes with old pictures trapped behind, some contractor's idea of decoration. I told myself not to press my face closer. I pressed my face closer and saw that the coffee cups had a faint reflection of a person who stood in my position on the other side of the glass. The steps kept coming. The landing I expected refused to arrive. The higher I went, the more my balance shifted from legs to mind. I began to feel like a person climbing in a story about a person climbing. The handrail grew slick, but not with sweat. It felt like a smooth stone chest pressed by waves. I wiped my palm on my jeans, and the fabric came away dry while my hand remembered being wet. The numbers on the pencil stairs along the skirting board had crept up without permission. All sevens now. The ticks in the wood had learned my pattern and hid themselves between beats to make me think I was missing steps. Halfway, by any honest measurement, though there was no halfway here, the walls started to bend. Not a fun house sway. A slow, tired slump, as if gravity had been whispering to the building for years, and the building had finally agreed to listen. The corner where wall met ceiling softened. Shadows took on a combed look, like hair smoothed back by water. The windows grew wider without changing shape. I could see more seen through them than the opening should allow. A basement with jars of peaches lined on a shelf, each one breathing a tiny circle of sugar mist against the glass. A hospital room with no patient and a bed that held the memory of one in the pattern of its sheets. A backyard with a snow angel under a patch of snow that did not melt, even at the edges where the grass pushed up like a careful question. Behind me, the breathing learned the number of my steps. On every seventh it paused, as if waiting for me to decide. On the eighth, it resumed with a soft hum that sounded almost pleased. I tested it. I climbed to 6 and stopped. The breath settled at the back of my neck and did not move. I took the 7th, and it drew in a small sip of air, like a person tasting. A thread of warmth touched the hair above my ear. I said a word to it that I would not say to a person. The word did nothing. It is not polite to swear at a staircase. It does not know your language. It knows your weight. I began to talk out loud, because narration protects you until it does not. I said I was counting. I said I would reach the top, and I would put my hand on the blank wall, and I would come back down, and this would be nothing but a story I tell badly later over cheap coffee. The sound of my voice calmed me, and calmed whatever listened, which was not the effect I wanted. It matched my volume. It learned the length of my sentences. It practiced my small laugh and improved it. By the time the landing arrived, I had lost track of what number I meant to cheer for. The stairs flattened into a square of floor that greeted my feet with surprise, like an old friend who had changed their haircut and hoped you would notice. The wall at the top was blank as promised. Pale green, hairline cracks, no door. I stood with my palm pressed to the plaster and felt a slow blood pulse in the cold. From the other side, a breath fogged back. I stepped away. The breathing continued. It was too close now to be a trick of acoustics. It came from inches beyond the wall, as intimate as a person sharing a secret. I moved sideways along the plaster, and the breath followed, as if the wall had a mouth that could slide. I said hello. The breath answered by pulling itself in, holding and releasing the way you do when you are about to speak and then choose not to. I leaned in and said the name I had written on the form at the site's supervisor's request. The breath did the same thing again. I tried a second name, the one on the penciled skirting board. Ed Weaver. The breath did not change. I shut my eyes for a count of 7 and opened them on a door that had not been there before. It was not a grand reveal. No trumpet of settling wood. The door simply existed where blank wall had been, with no seam to show it had ever been otherwise. Painted the same pale green. Brass knob, dull with the kind of age that still likes to be touched. No que llore. I held the knob and felt it warm to my grip in a way that suggested a hand on the other side. I did not want to turn it. I did. The latch clicked with a sound like a stair tick. The door swung inward on a darkness that was not full. A familiar smell came out. Coffee and dust, and the paper breath of a diner that never closes. I stepped through and found myself at the top of a staircase that did not match the one I climbed. It was wider and set with steps that had small rectangles of rubber on the edges. Below stretched a corridor that I knew but could not place. The windows along the wall looked out onto the rooms I had just glimpsed through thin glass. The diner with the 2 cups. The locker room with the scarf. The hospital bed with its patient shape of absence. I started down because that is what you do when the stairs you climbed up offer you a new way down. You accept the gift and hope the price is friendly. The echoes here were eager. Each step sent a sound down and across and around, and back to me wearing a new coat. Someone ahead, someone behind, someone across a landing that did not appear. Midway to the first turn, the building sighed in a way that belonged to its ribs, and a draft rose strong enough to lift a ring of dust and make it spin like a coin on a table. I rounded the turn and stopped so hard my knees stung. The corridor below was not the corridor I had left. The windows showed a hallway full of cubicles. The smell of coffee grew into the real thing. A tiny break room stood where the diner had been. The clock on the far wall was stuck between numbers, and each time it tried to free itself, it made a tick too familiar for comfort. I took another step down and felt a change in the air pressure. A heart leaned closer. The hair at the back of my neck flattened as if pressed by a palm. An unseen foot placed itself behind mine, careful and firm. I turned around quickly enough to make the railing complain. There was nobody on the stairs but the promise of somebody. The blank door at the top was gone. In its place, a window showed my own street, my own porch light, my own front door open a crack, as if I had forgotten it when I came here. I took a step toward it, and it turned back into pale green wall. Panic would have been easy then. I chose procedure. Down the last run. Keep my shoulder against the wall. Watch the corners. Listen for breathing that is not yours. Name the things you own. Name the shoes on your feet. Name the place where you parked your car. Say your name, even if the staircase has already learned it better than you. I descended until a new landing fetched up under my feet. On the wall above this, one sign waited in friendly block letters. Second floor. Only there had been 3 above already. The building had redrawn its map and handed me a version without the places I had visited. There's a kind of sustained fear that forgets the spike of terror and settles into patience. That fear arrived as the stairs below me multiplied. Every turn brought me to a copy of the floor I had just left, with details shifted a degree. In one corridor, the windows showed the factory floor as it used to look, full of light and the shimmer of heat above machines. In another, the windows showed night fields and a silver thread of water that did not belong in this county. In a third, the windows showed the same staircase from outside, as if I were a figure climbing inside a glass tube. I began to hear my own voice from another stairwell. It narrated the same way I narrated. It paused where I paused and grew quiet where I grew tired. I said hush to test it. Down the shaft, my voice said hush back, and then carried on with a confidence I did not feel. I took a step and my echo did not. I took another and it matched me with a delay. I stopped and waited. Behind my teeth, I felt a vibration like a wooden mouth practicing laughter. When the door appeared again, it brought a sound like rain. I pressed my ear to the panel and heard a soft crowd of drops on leaves. I opened it and found a landing that looked out onto trees. Real air moved there with the salt of far water in it. I leaned out and saw a hillside that did not exist in a landscape I know. Far below, a road curved and vanished behind a bend where a red truck crawled like a toy. I called into that air with my whole throat. No one looked up. The stairs here were made of a pale wood that shone as if waxed last week. I felt someone stand beside me, careful not to bump my shoulder. I did not look. If I looked and saw no one, I would be wrong. If I looked and saw someone, I would be wrong in a different way. The building drew a long breath, and the landing filled with the scent of my house after rain. That is when I understood the last part of the story the maintenance man did not want to tell. The stairs do not go nowhere. They learn where you came from. They add you to their routes. They fit your address like a key in a lock you did not know you were wearing. A laugh floated up from below that finally did sound like mine, only better. It had my gait inside it. I ran. If running is a mistake, it is an honest one, and I will own it. The steps struck back at my feet with small ticks that tried to count me. I jumped the last 3 on one flight and felt the breath behind me jump 2 and then 1, never quite catching, always letting me know it did not need to. The second floor sign came up again, and this time the second O and floor had been rubbed into the shape of an eye. I kept going. My lungs burned in the pleasant way they do when you think you're still in charge. I passed a window that showed the factory yard as it looked today and saw my car where I left it. A figure leaned against the hood, head bent as if listening to the engine that was not running. The figure wore my jacket. The jacket did not quite fit his shoulders. I smelled outside air and put my faith in it. A final turn. A landing I recognized by the way the plaster had buckled near the baseboard like a wave. The original corridor returned, with its dust and its honest doors that led to rooms with nothing in them. The mouth of the stair opened on the hallway, and I burst through, shoulder first, hand on the rail, to swing wide. I did not look back. You would have, but I did not. I have learned that many rituals involve looking back, and I was not interested in finishing theirs. The building let me go with a tiny drag, as if a thread had been tied to my sleeve and would have liked to remain attached. I stepped into the parking lot, and all four tires on my car sighed the way tires do when a person sinks into a driver's seat and realizes the road still believes in them. I did not start the engine. I sat with my hands on the wheel and felt the shape of my pulse in the leather. The factory windows stared. The stairwell window I had not noticed from outside sent a dull square of gloom at my windshield. Through that square, for a heartbeat only, a figure stood. It tilted its head like I do when I'm trying to understand a new sound. Then the square became a blank again, and rain began to fall in a line that matched the edge of the roof. At home, safe by design, I checked my phone for steps. It had counted far more than it should. The number ended in 7. I showered and listened to the pipes remember how to be useful. The water had new rhythm. It broke into little counts without my permission. I lay down and fell asleep with the relief of a person who got away from something that may not have been chasing them. Dream came strong and kind for a minute. Then the stairs arrived. In the dream, my hallway stretched longer than it should. The light at the end flickered, not with electricity, but with breath. The rug rippled as if someone walked on it from below. The door to the basement, which never sticks, stuck. I pulled it, and it let go with a sigh like a person leaving a chair. There were the stairs. Not my basement stairs. The narrow ones from the building. Clean steps that refused dust. Pale green walls with hairline cracks. A pencil line along the skirting board with small numbers. 1 to 7, and then again. I woke and laughed at myself the way you do when you expect your voice to sound foolish, and it does not. The laugh echoed in my own house a beat late. I waited for it to finish. It did not. It continued after me and wandered away down the hall. I sat up with care. The door to the bedroom stood open as if it had forgotten it had been closed. In the mirror of the wardrobe, I saw my reflection with the wrong posture. It leaned to the left the way I leaned to the right when collecting thoughts. My right hand lifted and ran through my hair. The reflection's left hand did the same, a half second late, like a staircase practicing someone's walk. Days passed. I try not to tell this because telling decides things, but you asked for the story. The stairs did not appear as a full set again. They arrived in pieces. The third step lay waiting between my living room and kitchen, just a slight rise in the floorboards with that tick inside. The seventh step lived in my front walk, a place where even snow hesitated. The space between the second and the third in the building turned up in my office where the carpet meets tile, and everyone trips there once and then never again because the floor learns how you lift your feet. I would be washing a mug and feel a breath gather at the back of my neck. I would set the mug down on the counter, and the sound would be too careful, as if my kitchen had become a landing. I started counting without telling myself to. On the way to the bathroom, on the way to the car, on the way to the store. 7 was always the place my lungs waited. 7 was the moment the house held its breath and asked a question it did not want answered. Sometimes, walking past a mirror, I would see a door in the reflection where my wall had nothing. If I looked directly, the wall stayed honest. If I looked with the corner of my eye, I saw the brass knob and felt the old guilt of wanting to touch something that belongs to a story and not to you. One evening I returned from work and found a slip of paper on my doormat. Pale green, torn from plaster. On it, in sharp pencil, someone had drawn a tiny set of stairs. 1 through 7. Someone had circled the last. I told myself a kid had done it. I told myself dust looks green under certain streetlights. I told myself I'd reach for my keys and drop them, and I had not heard the tick because I was thinking about dinner. I locked the door and leaned my head against it and listened to my own building breathe. The last time I tested the question was a week after my visit. I stood at the top of my own staircase, the real one to the basement, and I counted under my breath. 1 for curiosity, 2 for the wish, 3 for the mouth. I took 7 steps down and waited. On the 8th, I heard the sound of would remember a foot. Not my foot. The warmth at my neck collected and released. The breath tasted like dust and tin. Very softly, below me, someone tried out my name in the shape the maintenance man had used. They got it right on the second try. I went back up and shut the basement door and put a chair under the knob, not because it would help, but because ritual is a kind of politeness and I wanted the house to feel respected. If you ever go to that building, if you ever put your foot on those clean steps, do not think about proving anything. Stairs do not need proof. They need patience. They need a person who counts the way you count and breathes the way you do when you climb. They will take your rhythm and wear it. They will learn your address and add a stop to their route. They will escort you up and deliver you down to a place that feels like home until you notice the clock stuck between numbers and the way the door that should be a wall opens when you ask it not to. As I finish telling you this, there is a small sound in the hall. A tick inside wood. A pause on 7. A breath held and then given back. I sit still and let the house practice being a stairwell. I let the reflection in the dark television learn to keep its hands where mine are. I choose not to check the door that appears in the glass near the corner of the room. I choose not to greet the figure who stands with their head tilted, learning my way of listening. I say this one thing out loud, and the echo does not hurry to obey me. Stay. Please stay where stairs belong.